The views expressed in this episode are those of the guests and host and do not necessarily reflect the positions or endorsements of the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, nor the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence. This podcast is produced as part of an independent research fellowship and is for educational purposes only, not professional or business advice.
There's something that happens when you spend 20 years inside one of the largest distributors in North America in a variety of roles. You truly start to see the business differently. You stop seeing transactions and you start seeing systems. You stop seeing headcount and you start seeing culture. And eventually you arrive at a conclusion that sounds simple, but can take years to really believe. In distribution, the people are not just important, they are the business. Welcome to Distribution at the Crossroads. I'm your host, Nick Pericles. This podcast is produced in partnership with the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence. Ben Albu and I filmed this one in Austin, Texas. We were both on our way to the same industry summit, and we carved out a few hours before things got going in order to sit down, and this was a rich conversation. Ben came into Wesco Distribution in Pittsburgh with an engineering degree, a finance graduate degree, and a job title that didn't match what he actually needed to do, but that's okay. It turned out to be a gift. His first day on the job, he was in a branch north of Pittsburgh, washing dock doors and fixing racking. Over the next 5 years, he was on the road 200 days a year across every function of the business. A decade after that, he was leading M&A, sitting across from the owners of family-owned distributors in hotel lobbies off the highway in Kansas, learning how they thought, what they'd built, and understanding how this industry grows. Ben Albu has since retired from Wesco Distribution and is now the president of Rocky Rail Solutions, where he spends his time working with distributors and those in the B2B ecosystem, improving their operations and focusing on how to drive commercial growth. He makes an observation in this conversation that I think every distributor needs to sit with. He says that distribution is an asset-light business. Now, that can be a finance term, but what it really means is this. If you're honest about how your facility compares to your competitor's facility, how your products compare to their products, how your price point compares to theirs, the differentiation can be limited. What is not limited is what you do with your people and your culture. That is a moat in distribution that can be genuinely hard to replicate. We also get into technology decisions that are right in front of distributors today. Ben lays out a 3-part framework for how he looks at a distribution technology stack. And yes, new tools are part of that, but it goes deeper than that. He makes a case that order entry automation, it's compelling, not because it's a new idea, but because he explains that the technology has crossed a threshold where it works, what it's worth, and why the constraint is now human adoption rather than capability. And towards the end of our conversation, Ben names a real decision facing distribution leaders right now. Not just about what technology to buy, but this idea of transforming your technology stack from one that allows the business to be run into one that actually runs the business. And in an environment with real economic uncertainty and competitive disruption happening all at the same time, this, my friends, is a crossroads decision. This is episode 3 of Distribution at the Crossroads, and here is Ben Albu. Ben Albu, welcome to Distribution at the Crossroads. I'm really looking forward to today.
Nick, it's great to be here, man. Just great to be here.
We've known each other for a couple of years now.
Not that long, surprisingly. I have no idea how our paths didn't cross earlier in our mutual careers, but yeah, just a couple of years.
Yeah, well, for a long time with what I was doing in distribution, I was behind a computer screen delivering on the solutions versus being out and connecting with people. So I'm glad that our paths have crossed here.
Yeah, likewise.
So let's go ahead and start. Would love to hear, and I think our audience would enjoy as well, your background in distribution. I've gotten to know it a little bit, I think. Let's go ahead and start there.
Yeah, it's a interesting tale. I mean, everybody that I asked that question to, which is probably everybody I meet in distribution, has an interesting tale for the most part. Mine's a little atypical. A lot of the people I worked with and I work with today, I talk with on a regular basis, have a parent that started in the business or came right out of college and were in a Texas A&M, were in distribution track and knew that's what they wanted to do. I found myself coming into distribution about 2003, 2004 timeframe, not having any idea whatsoever what a distributor was. logistics.
Yeah.
Quite literally zero concept.
We hear that a lot, Ben. When people come into the industry, they think, okay, there's logistics. Maybe it's a construction organization, but they quickly learn the world here.
The job title was business analyst. And
Okay.
I was a recently fired consultant. And so I felt that was the one thing I was qualified to do, although I had just been fired from being a consultant. I felt like, hey, I could be a business analyst.
Yeah.
And I was in a new city, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where my wife and my wife's family is from. We had recently moved there. I knew nobody in town. I was 2 years postgraduate school. I was an engineer by training. Prior to that, I'd worked in the steel industry. I'd worked briefly as a medical device design engineer. Spent a couple of years consulting prior to, as I mentioned, being let go very favorably there from one of the large global consulting firms. And I needed a job. I was 23, 24 years old. We were getting married, and I needed a job. And I saw an offer from a company I'd never heard of before. And frankly, in Pittsburgh, my entire in-laws had never heard of before, which is strange considering it's a Fortune 500 company headquartered in Pittsburgh. And I took a couple of interviews, and 20 some years later, I was still there at Wesco Distribution.
Great. So was it Wesco that you started?
I did. I started at Wesco in Pittsburgh at the headquarters office. Yeah.
So talk us through your journey. You started as a business analyst, and what did you learn initially when you got into that role around the world of distribution? And kind of what was your trajectory? What path?
Yeah, the first thing I learned is the job title that they were hiring for wasn't actually what they were hiring for, what they wanted, which is true a lot of times in distribution because we wear a lot of hats. I mean, I like to say that every person in a distribution business is a salesperson. Doesn't matter what your job title is. I think that's a universal truth across all segments of distribution. I was being brought in to help launch Lean, the Toyota production system, Lean methodology, in distribution at Wesco. At that period of time, Wesco was a young public company. It was a little under $3 billion in revenue, so it was large, but it wasn't operating yet at peak performance is the nicest thing I can say. And it had gone public a few years prior and was having operational challenges and candidly cash flow challenges. For those of you that have maybe a smartphone in front of you, you can Google what the stock price was. It was about $3 a share. Okay. You can see what it is today. It's done quite well. But back then it was about $3 a share, and we were really struggling. Wesco was really struggling operationally. Had done a number of acquisitions, had even then a number of different information systems, and was looking for a way to get cultural cohesion around the business. And so I was informed during the interview process what I was really being brought in for was not what I did when I was in the consulting world, but really to get out into branches and start helping operationally in branches. And so I got into my first day. I was at a branch, very first day on the job. I was hired at headquarters, but was in a branch up in New Brighton, Pennsylvania, a northern suburb, I guess you could say, of Pittsburgh, in an industrial location, helping that location quite literally wash the dock doors, make it look nice, and then fix the warehousing and the racking equipment that was in that facility. And that was my very first day on the job. Was doing that. Yeah,
all of those different types of jobs add up to what a distributor really does. So let's say you could go back and coach a young Ben Albu on his first day, going actually to one of those branches and working. You're not able to tell him, all the experiences that he's going to have. What advice would you give him on how to accelerate his understanding of distribution and of what really makes a distribution company tick and where the hidden value is?
Yeah, I would probably tell him candidly to stay the path that I was on at that period of time. I didn't know it at this period of time, so maybe I would gently nudge myself and say, hey, look, you're in a decent spot here for learning the business really quickly. But I was fortunate that for my first, say, 5 years with the company, I was on the road about 200 days a year in our locations, in locations all over the country and all across North America at that period of time, in all the various roles of the business, from operations and warehousing through sales and business development, purchasing, merchandising, pricing, finance. I spent a time in
all
finance.
The elements.
And I was really lucky because of that sort of internal consultant role that I had as a change agent, that I had an opportunity to work across all various pillars of the business in a short period of time. And looking back on it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a wonderful way to spend my mid to late 20s and my mid to late 30s. I learned a tremendous amount about the business and about the industries in which the company operated. And I really enjoyed having the opportunity to come into work every day and ask questions, which is really what my job was. It was really just to ask and to learn, and then try and find ways to apply those learnings to make the business better at the end of the day. And so I would probably tell myself, just keep doing it. Don't screw this up.
Stay curious. Don't screw it up.
Don't talk so much. Maybe your first year, maybe listen just a little bit more, if I'm being honest and self-critical. But it really was it was an engineer. As I said, I'm an engineer. It was an engineer's dream. It was an operation that genuinely needed some improvement, and it was an organization and a time time and a place where people were willing to improve. And so it was wonderful.
Well, I think your background of engineering and applying that, I mean, you talk about the Toyota methodology of coming in and trying to determine what's working well, what do we need to tune? What would you say was there something else that, as it relates to your engineering background, that you think set you up for what you would go on to do at Wesco, and how you would analyze and break down problems to create value?
Yeah, I think there was quite a bit in my educational experience to that point. I mean, I was a young professional, so make no mistake, I had a few years of experience in the real world. But the engineering curriculum, which I'm a big proponent of, regardless of what bias, but regardless of what maybe young adults want to do with their career, it's a wonderful generalist undergraduate degree that teaches critical thinking, that teaches advanced mathematics, that requires you to always be thinking about, and this is particularly relevant for what I think we may talk about in a bit, to use the most recent and relevant tool set to solve existing problems.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're always on the lookout for, I see that people have been struggling with this for a while. What haven't they attempted? And might that work in this application? That combined with a graduate degree in finance, which I think helped round out more of the understanding of how the business operated, and what really
with a true P&L understanding,
what investors care about, what it means to be barely covering your interest coverage ratio, for example, which was something at the time that candidly Wesco was struggling with right before I joined. That helped, and along with the brief stint, a couple years of consulting, of sitting in boardrooms as a young professional, listening to Fortune 500 executives and Fortune 500 boards and private company boards and even a few ESOPs about how they think and talk about the business. All of that, I was really just candidly dumb and lucky to be in the right place at the right time in a business like the one I mentioned, like Wesco, that I could apply those very, very green skills in an environment was low risk and high velocity of opportunity is the nicest way I can put it.
Well, that's an important takeaway to understand, is especially for organizations that have identified, they typically call them emerging leaders, to give them exposure to those types of conversations. Different business models, if they don't have necessarily the business backing, or the business kind of underpinnings of their education, but they, whether they're a technology aspect, whether they're a supply chain, giving them that type of overview can really help round them out to turn into an executive. Yeah,
I am a huge proponent to that point of an academy mindset in organizations. I do think that there is something around, regardless if it's a large organization or even a relatively small one of maybe just 100 or a couple hundred employees, there is something to bringing classes of individuals in on a regular basis and allowing them to work together across the business, across all the functions, across all the segments of the business, if at all possible. I have kept in touch with many of the people I worked with in those early days. Some of them still at Wesco, believe it or not, and most of them have moved on to other businesses and in some cases other industries. A lot of them have stayed in distribution, but the common thread is that pressure cooker environment across the entire business where there was a freedom to operate. It would have been very different if I would have candidly been hired as an inside sales rep. I probably would have spent a few years at a minimum before I, lost enough customers, lost enough clients that they promoted me to outside sales. So it would have been very narrow in what I was exposed to. I really am a proponent of that academy, that whatever you want to call it, a development cycle for newer employees, specifically younger employees in the organization.
Yeah. How are you seeing that done today in 2025, 2026 across distribution? What are some successful models of maybe how that's different today than how might have been when you first started?
Yeah, I'm not sure maybe folks did think of it that way, but a lot of the most successful distributors that I've come to know, distribution businesses, and that I'm friendly with and work with today, have invested in internal development of talent thoughtfully. With a purpose. And I will say that it seems to me, this is just my opinion, it seems to me that today there are more structured programs than maybe there were 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago in the industry. Maybe 2 decades ago or so, it was a more defined career path where you start maybe in the warehouse and then you work your way to inside sales, or depending on the model, maybe counter sales if it's a counter-based, branch-based business, and then outside sales or business development, and then maybe up through the organization, sales management, operations, something along those lines. That still exists. I still see that in a lot of places, but there are a few distributors I'm working with now that have very thoughtfully well-designed first year, second year, third year in the organization programs.
Now, what type of difference is that making, do you find?
Cultural consistency is the first one. So
Okay.
even before it begins to pay dividends with capabilities and skill set development, what I've really seen is that it brings those younger, newer employees into the culture of the organization much more quickly than simply giving them a job
And allowing serendipity
and then
to
training
take
and
place,
developing
yeah.
to the place. They're getting access to leaders across the business. They're seeing different operations, especially in distribution, especially in branch-based distribution. If you've seen one branch, sometimes you've seen one branch, even in the same company. There's another one may look very, very differently. It's giving those individuals exposure, but it's showing them and teaching them the culture of the enterprise. And so there's one business in particular I won't mention right now that I'm working with, but that is without a doubt the core strength of the business is the culture. And they've been very successful at hiring rapidly as they've grown very quickly, but bringing new people in from outside distribution, many of them, and bringing them into the culture of the business deliberately through a planned program for the first couple of years.
Well, I know every distributor, when they talk about their own strengths, first, well, we always talk about customer relationships, but then quickly afterwards, it comes to culture. That's either a number 2 or a number 3, pushing number 2 in terms of what makes them different and how they operate. And I find that is something that leaders are thinking about and staying up late at night, trying to determine how do we continue culture when people are staying in jobs for shorter durations than they have in the past. Consolidation continues to be a big driver and pusher on a lot of organizations. Let's take the conversation in the direction of what have you learned from those who've come before us in distribution that
I'm smirking and smiling, Nick, because I think anybody who's spent just a few years in this industry has stories. I mean, this is a story-rich industry.
It really is.
That is probably one of the very few things that's universal across all the many segments of the multi-trillion-dollar U.S. domestic distribution industry to talk about. Is that we all like to share stories. I've been really this will be a common refrain. I've been really fortunate. Part of my role, my time at Wesco was I spent about a decade in the M&A role. And so I led mergers and acquisitions for the company. And what that meant is that I got to go all around the world meeting with business owners. Because most of the time as an M&A person, if you're not familiar with it, is not spent sort of in the room doing the deal or reviewing the purchase agreement or figuring out the valuation models or even planning and executing the integration. There's a lot of work with that. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But most of your time is spent, off a highway in the middle of Kansas at a Red Roof Inn, getting up early to go to breakfast the next morning with the owner of a multi-$100 million distribution business based in rural Kansas. And you spend a lot of time with the owners and with their families and with their leadership. And so I was fortunate to get exposed to a wide swath of different kinds of successful entrepreneurs and multi-generational owners, primarily of private businesses.
Yeah.
I was also lucky that in that internal consulting role, I was exposed to the senior team early and often. There was a few decisions, actually, a few folks that kind of stuck out of me right out of the gate. The first is I'll share this one story.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. I'm going to look at the camera. I'm sorry. I'll leave you nameless, but you know who you are. I was being interviewed for the job. And keep in mind, I'm 23, 24 years old, I think I was at the time. And I'm sitting in a distribution center office. So the office kind of in the corner of the DC.
Sure.
It's the DC manager who's there. And this is like my 5th interview. This is a really comprehensive interview, by the way. I was hired by one of the leading global strategy consulting firms 3 years prior, and it was less of a rigorous interview than I got.
And this is at Wesco, your first job. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and all the interviews at this point had been sort of, tell me about yourself, and a couple of behavioral interviews, and even one where I was asked to sketch out a distribution center and talk about whether the racking was laid out right or not, which I admitted I had no idea, first and foremost, what racking was.
Yeah.
And second, you don't want me doing this. But I was sitting with this DC manager, and in the first 30 seconds, he drops 4 F-bombs on me.
Great.
Now, I'd worked at a steel mill. I'm a Midwestern kid. I grew up, I thought I was going to be a metallurgical engineer, a steel engineer in my career. It's what I went to school for. So I was familiar with salty language in the workplace. That wasn't an issue. But what I wasn't catching on to immediately was he was testing, because they had not hired from outside very much. He was testing like, hey, can this young kid actually hold up when a branch manager is dressing him down and telling him, what he thinks. And so, I initially thought this individual as well, this is a pretty rough dude and, probably somebody I'm going to have to figure out how to connect with over time. Turns out he was the nicest gentleman that you'll ever want to meet. And he invested so much time. He was senior in the organization. He invested so much time in sharing what he knew and also educating me on the questions that I wasn't asking. He's like, hey, there's 3 more questions you should ask here, and here's what they are. He wouldn't tell me the answer.
That's gold.
Phenomenal. Yeah. And so I took away a lot of leadership, but also I took a lot culturally away from that, which is my prior experience in strategic consulting was I didn't experience this, at least. There wasn't a lot of investment in the individual. There's a lot of training. I mean, don't get me wrong. I went away for almost a month and a half when I was first hired there to consultant school on how to behave in front of a client and how to learn the methodologies. And then I went to SAP school for 2 months where I learned how to do certain things in SAP. There was an investment in skill set, but there wasn't an investment in the person. And what he was doing deliberately, and because it was just how he acted and thought, was he was investing in me as a person. And so I took a tremendous amount away from that experience. And I always remember it because of the half dozen F-bombs that were dropped in the first 45 seconds.
No, and then the relationship. Yeah.
The relationship afterwards. Yeah.
Well, I find that's a great question to ask people is first of all, the reverence with which you talk about somebody like that, who really was formative in your early career, who helped you understand nuances about the industry that you're then able to build upon. And we stand upon the shoulders of people like that. I find that for people who are coming into the industry, especially young technology operators or people who are joining distribution in order to, make a difference, that's a great kind of icebreaker question when you meet somebody is, tell me about your early days in distribution. Who helped you learn the ropes? And that always leads to, like you said,
there's always somebody. Look, we don't have enough time. I could go through literally dozens of.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that I candidly love this industry is that, I've worked in other places briefly, but I've worked in medical device. I've worked in metals and mining. I've worked in steel plants. That same level of interpersonal connectivity is not as intense in those other places that I've been. And it's not even close.
Yeah. Why do you, what drives that, Ben?
Well, I think, the economist in me, so the B school guy in me looks at, one of the reasons that candidly investors like distribution businesses, which is we're asset light, which is really kind of a fancy finance and accounting way for saying the most valuable thing that's there is the people, not the individual assets. It's not the intellectual property. It's not the patents, if you will. It's not the know-how. If you're really honest as a distributor and you say, how's my facility different from my competitor's facility? The reality is probably not in ways that really matter at the end of the day. If there are, you might want to fix.
Well, there's diminishing returns on improvements that you can continue.
There's diminishing returns, but there's limited opportunity for differentiation. Yeah. This is a controversial thing for somebody like me, an advisor, to say. There's limited opportunity for differentiation in the core business model in most segments of distribution. It is truly the people and the culture of the organization and the tools that they have at their disposal that make the difference at the end of the day. And I think if you come into this, if you come into a distribution environment and you don't recognize that, you probably don't stay around very long.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is this evolutionary weeding out process after a half a decade or so, where folks that aren't aligned towards that aren't naturally biased towards that kind of operation, find themselves no longer there. And so that's Ben's theory and thesis on the topic. I'm sure the academics have a different view, but I didn't see that when I was in medical device, for example. It was about the IP. It was
certainly.
It was
about that's a big value
design.
driver.
I mean, every day I had to clock in and clock out and sign my design book and sign away anything I might have worked on that particular day.
Sure.
To Johnson & Johnson was the company, to J&J. I've never had to do that at a distribution company. Nobody's ever asked for my logbooks or my design. They have asked how I'm doing.
There you go. Yeah, that's a big part of it. Let's pull on that thread of limited competitive differentiation and business model. Now,
it's a dangerous thing. I probably shouldn't have said that.
No, it's interesting because your experience in having seen a lot of different M&A activity throughout your time. You've seen global players, you've seen regional players, you've seen small mom and pop shops and things like that. From what you've seen now to where we are today, again, 2025, do you see consolidation being a big driver of value in the industry? And if so, what does the future look like for a regional or a smaller distributor, Ben?
It depends.
Yeah.
It's an industry specific question.
Okay. So vertical specific.
Vertical specific, without a doubt. So most of my career, as I mentioned a couple of times, was spent in the electrical space, what is now the electrical and data communications and security space post the Wesco Annixter merger. In that space, when I joined in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I lived and where I was based, you could go to about 12 different distributors, not 12 different branches, but 12 different badge distributors, competitive to Wesco and buy the exact same products. many times at the same price point, at the same pretty much service level at the end of the day. Since then, you do that same thing in Pittsburgh, and somebody might want to check me on this. I think it's probably 4.
Okay.
And so there has...
That's a great question to go ask an AI tool, your favorite AI tool.
Yeah, ask your favorite AI tool. How many, if you just pick switchgear, how many distributors are there franchise in Pittsburgh for commercial construction, for example? I think it's 4 or 5. So there has been a consolidation in channel and electrical, and there has been a pretty significant consolidation really in the past decade with major M&A deals taking place, and also some channel rationalization on the manufacturer side as they've thought more strategically about their channel structures. And it's also true, somebody else checked me on this, or ChatGPT, I think the average profitability of a NAAD electrical distributor is about 2x on an EBITDA basis that it was pre-COVID.
Interesting.
Now, there are multiple reasons for that. And there's the COVID effect, absolutely. But I would contend that consolidation is one of the primary drivers for the uniform increase in profitability across the entire industry.
Okay.
I see the same thing in building products, see the same thing in HVAC, see the same thing to a certain degree in segments of industrial, very specialized segments of industrial. And so, yes, I think consolidation has had an impact on profitability. In addition to that, there's no doubt that from an investor's perspective, particularly private equity investors' perspective, that distribution has been an area of outsized investment for the past 10 years.
Yeah, and we're seeing that the public markets as well.
The public markets even, that
have been happening.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Let's go deep on, an individual organization. We won't talk about any specific ones. You walk into a distributor, you spent time on the business model, but you're also technology minded. What are you looking for in terms of a technology stack in order to ensure that organization can continue to remain competitive in what it is that they do?
Well, from a technology stack perspective,
it could be technology stack, could be people, process, tech. Anyone.
Let me start with technology stack because I do think that's a good place to start. First and foremost, this is an obvious one, but it's something that's not broken. And you can usually tell when it's broken pretty quickly. But something that's not broken, but then also from a sort of a core tech stack perspective, I like to see, and I'm not necessarily an ERP guy, even though I started my career in SAP to a degree, selling SAP to a degree. I like to see an ERP that's thoughtful for the industry or the segment or the vertical in which the distributor operates.
So how do you determine that? What does thoughtful mean?
Well, it's pretty easy. So there are a number of vertical specific ERPs inside of distribution. In electrical, of course, you've got a number of Epicor products. P21 is a little more universal across, but you've got Eclipse, which is really electrically specific. In building products, you've got things like DMSI Agility and other kinds of products. There are purpose-built ERPs that have the capability to serve that kind of distribution.
Okay.
And so first and foremost, ideally, for a stable business, there should be an ERP that matches the business in which they're operating. That's the first litmus test, get out of the top of the first inning kind of thing.
Yeah, because ERP is foundational for technology stacks.
I'd love not to have to use one, but I'm not certain of any other way to close the books at the moment.
Certainly.
They are, for the moment, required for purely, if nothing but purely accounting perspective. After that, the really big thing that's kind of like, okay, is this distributor operating, or is this distributor looking to do more, to innovate and to expand profitability? I look for some type of data abstraction beyond the ERP.
Okay.
Ideally, best case, the entire data environment of the ERP. So in plain language, every interaction that a human has with that ERP, every human action, whether it's a quote or an order or a receipt or a credit memo, or you go on, every interaction that a human has with that ERP is fully logged with all of the individual records, or in SAP speak, documents that are created, fully abstracted outside of the ERP. They exist somewhere else.
Now, what value is that creating? It already exists in the ERP. Now we're just doubling data.
The most basic and fundamental value, the historical value, is BI. You couldn't really do BI without that, right? So that's the one that most folks know. But the real one for this moment in time that is different than it was just 5 years ago is that all of those proliferation of applications that are being developed for distribution, whether they're AI applications or they don't use AI at all, they just solve a problem, they need that information.
They depend on that integration.
They depend on that data, first of all, and then they have to your point, they have to have an integration, in many cases, back into the ERP. And so that's the third thing to look for, which is the data abstracted? And is there an integration capability back into the ERP? Because at the core, at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is push that ERP down where it belongs, which is an accounting system to record the business and close the books and just make certain that the financial records are squeaky clean and correct. Everything else, like it always has in most distributors, comes out of the ERP and has worked somewhere else. And without the data being abstracted and without an integration layer there, it's almost impossible to do that because you're swivel chairing between applications.
Yeah, you're developing point integrations between each solution, and then you're managing each one independently.
Fragile, costly, there's a cyber risk with that as well, also a training issue. And so if I'm walking into an average mid-sized distributor today, and I'm doing a quick litmus test from a technology perspective, one is, do they have the ERP and ship in order? Is it the right kind of ERP ballpark? I don't even care if it's old. It really doesn't even matter if it's old. Does it work for the business? And then second, how much of the data is abstracted and how many integrations are available? And that three-legged stool will tell you an awful lot about the relative maturity and readiness, future readiness of a distributor, in my opinion.
Well, and it's interesting that you said that that's changed over the last 5 years. That's a different mindset. We've always thought, monolithic ERP, all contained in one, end-to-end solutions. There have been at least B2B specific solutions, but in the last, I'd say even 2 years, Ben, there's been an explosion of technology that's not just distribution specific, but it's vertical distribution specific.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It really is kind of crazy. I was in Silicon Valley, what was it, 2017, 2018? And we were trying to get a distribution focused tech accelerator off the ground. So it was one of those great jobs. I loved every minute of this. And today, you look at the proliferation of vertical specific distribution tech that's out there. So to answer your question directly about why wasn't this, so important beyond BI 6, 7, 8 years ago? What were you going to do with the data at the end of the day? I mean, really, we're going to
analyze it.
You're going to stare at it and see if it told you anything about the business and maybe generate some sales reports and some purchasing reports while you're doing it. Today, all those boundary applications that have come up really in the past 3 to 4 years that do some really wonderful value creating things require that information, require those integrations. That's why it's mission critical.
Let's not talk about an area that I know is near and dear to your heart. I've heard you give a presentation on this before, and I think you're giving one here coming soon. We're laughing about this. Adoption.
Yeah.
Adoption of technology. Now, you've talked about adoption of sales technology, but let's just abstract that to general technology adoption in distribution. We have all lived through an application that looked amazing in the demo.
Yeah.
Everyone saw it, signed off on it, and said, this is going to be great. A lot of work goes in order to rolling it out, doing the integrations like we talked about. But then 3, 6 months, 12 months later, people don't use it. Let's talk about technology adoption and distribution. What really drives that to make sure that it's successful?
Well, this will be maybe a controversial answer. I don't know. The necessity of the tech. What I mean by that is, I've seen 100% adoption on really terrible tech where it's absolutely necessary. I've seen financial conversions where the new financial environment is not as good as the old financial environment. It's less efficient, less effective, has a bigger lag, requires more labor to get things done. Maybe it's got a feature or two that some people care about, but it's pushing a lot of work somewhere else. 100% adoption. Why is that? Because you can't close the books unless you use the financial system. You have to pound your way through the pain. I've seen more than enough failed WMS and TMS implementations that also have 100% adoption. Why? Because you can't dispatch trucks and you can't pick and put away product unless you use it.
Even if it's, subpar, doesn't work all the way.
So I think failure for sort of core tech and distribution is fail to return on the investment case or the investment thesis of the tech. The area where I see true abandonment, like literally the only area where I've seen, you walk and you talk to folks, and I did this in my M&A role. You talk to owners and you talk to head of sales, VP of sales, and you say, well, show me where that information sits about that customer, or how does your sales team, get more shots on goal, or how do they close more deals? And they would always talk about some CRM application they had 6 years ago, or some data tool they had 4 months ago, or some sales tech tool they had a year and a half ago. Those actually truly die. They get invested in, they get built, they get pushed out as a part of a deployment, and then usage many times goes to, over time, absolute zero.
True zero.
And so it's really in the sales tool area that I see true death of applications.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, there's usually a reason you got to use it.
Yeah. You got to force it in some way. I mean, one aspect that I've looked at whenever there's a new technology that comes into an organization, I think having a respect beforehand for whatever is in place. And we all laugh at the proverbial green screen, and these still exist in, I don't know if I can say majority at this point, but in many organizations where you're running an on-prem green screen application that works in,
or even a cloud green screen.
Or even I've
seen those,
cloud,
believe it or not, public cloud green screen. It's a thing.
That's amazing. But those work. Like, depending on how difficult it is for a new hire to come in, a recent college grad into the 2020s to come in and learn how to do that, they work, they run the business, and very successful businesses have been built on the back of these technology applications. And so there really hasn't been a need to change up to that point. And so how do you look at the delta between where we are right now versus we're going to implement a new tech and it's going to provide some amount of increase? Do you have a kind of a framework on how you evaluate something like that? Because sure, new tech is great, but when is it just shiny new tech that looks better versus truly provides a value? Like what are the questions that you ask to interrogate
I
that?
think it's as much process as it is questions. And the reason for that is either the way you phrase that question, which is it preassumes there's tech to be evaluated.
It preassumes that. That's a great point.
And so I try, and this is something I see a lot of, and go to a lot of industry events, or used to go to a lot of industry events, and there's always the tech vendors there, and you go to Silicon Valley, and it's Shark Tank. They're pitching you on their tech.
Well, it's tech centric, yeah.
And so you're looking for technology without a problem in mind in many cases. I think it's got to be flipped, really, first and foremost. Not saying you can't do tech scouting and then apply it to the business. That does work from time to time, but we're really, really good in distribution, I think, on, in my experience at least, on solving for real world problems. If the fork truck is broken, we get the fork truck fixed.
You fix it.
If I'm not able to get to all my delivery sites for my customers by 9 a.m. and they need me there by 9 a.m., I add a truck and a driver or two to make that happen. I don't go to the truck lot and look at the trucks and say, I wonder if I should get 3 or 4 more trucks. And well, I got to go figure out how I'm going to use the trucks because I just bought the trucks. But we do that with software. We get enamored with the glossiness of the tech, and then we go and try and find a ways to apply it to the business. And it really is as foundational as starting from a different point, which is understanding what are the needs and the opportunities of the business. What is it worth to solve those? What is it worth to solve those? How much sales growth am I going to get? How much margin expansion am I get? How much working capital efficacy and pickup am I going to pick up from solving this issue? Once that is at least understood to a horseshoe and hand grenade level of precision, then begin the tech process of what technologies can I use to solve this. And it really gets inverted all the time. I mean, it's oftentimes inverted the other way around. And when you start with the tech in mind and go looking for a problem, it's the hammer looking for a nail. It really is.
Yeah. Fascinating way to think about it. Let's talk about opportunities that you see within distribution today. You've had exposure over the last 20, 25 years, to different types of business models, just in the role that you've had. Recently, you've been engaging with a variety of different companies to understand, and help them put in place processes and practices, a lot of times centered around technology, not always tech centric though. What do you see are overlooked areas that might be simple, that we might be looking past the mark on, where there's opportunity to use technology to make a difference in an organization?
Yeah, I think there's one that just screams at me right now, because the technology has finally gotten to a point where its efficacy is high enough that it's almost universally applicable across distribution. And it's also an area where there's a tremendous amount of time and human capital deployed. That's order entry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing what's happened. You talk about tech, startups have come out in the last couple of years. Order entry automation in the last 18 months has attracted some of the brightest young minds all throughout the world, engineers, AI engineers that are developing typically vertical specific AI automation tools. And they work. I mean,
they're remarkable.
They're remarkably effective today compared to what they were just a few short years ago. And if you walk into almost any distributor, not all distributors, because some have different models, but you walk into any industrial focused distributor or construction focused distributor, or maintenance focused distributor, which are broad classifications, you're going to find teams of people whose primary job it is to translate a customer purchase order into something that your ERP can read. And typically, it's a general rule in distribution. The first supplier to come back with price and availability usually gets the order. Not always true in every segment, certainly, but in MRO consumables, first one back. If you've got a buyer at the other end of that to come back with price and availability, not the lowest price, but I can get you this product at this period of time, typically gets the order.
Response time's a heavy driver of when
those kinds of applications are literal gold mine for that. They're not super easy yet to deploy, to be completely transparent, but the tech is there. The complexity is actually no longer the tech. 3 years ago it was getting the tech to work. Now it's getting the applications to work for your business and finding ways to get them deployed and get them adopted, which is really where the issue is at the moment. That's one where if you're a distributor and you've got anybody entering orders in your business, which I think you probably do, that's an area I'd put immediate investigation into. Understand what it's worth. Like I said, start with what is it worth if I get 75% of my email purchase orders entered within 3 seconds of them showing up on my email server, my Exchange server on Microsoft or my Google server. Find out what that's worth, determine what you would do with that savings, that incremental time, those individuals that are currently entering these orders, and then aggressively scout technologies that can do it, because there's a good chance there's at least 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, or 5 specific order entry automation technologies for your vertical that are out there that have use in the market today.
Yeah. And like you said, they become more and more, the technologies become more and more available and specific to the nuances of a vertical. Because we oftentimes genericize B2B distribution, but it's very different between plumbing, electrical, and then you can even go outside of this to chemical, to food and beverage and other areas like this. And the technology it's remarkable. It's an excellent area. Many organizations have explored this, but for the ones that haven't, if you want to be wowed and brought up to speed on what is now able to be done end of 2025, beginning of 2026. Yeah. Great place to start.
Yeah. Nick, I'll share an example. This is just literally in the last 6 months. I've talked with a number of founders who are working in this particular.
Sure.
And it's attractive, like many things, especially in tech investing. The folks follow each other when they see a thematic investment that's working one place. They invest, thematically on that. Yep. And this is an area that's received a lot of thematic investment over the last 6 to
a lot of interest,
12 months. And I was talking with the founders, a founder just a few weeks ago, actually. And one of the tests for me had always been like, hey, you're receiving this purchase order, this PDF that's got a generic description, and it's a part number or a part description that is a true commodity. Meaning there's probably 30 manufacturers for this thing.
That also,
an electrical, you can think of it like maybe like a wall box, like a 4-square box on the side of the wall. There's lots of manufacturers that make that. And your contractors, you're going to send it over. I need 80 pieces of a 4x4 box. It's up to the inside salesperson to determine which brand they're looking for based on what I stock locally and what I've sold them previously before, and maybe what I want to offer based on my inventory position.
When you talk about tribal knowledge, that is the definition of tribal knowledge.
And 2 years ago, what the order automation tech would identify is that here are the 37 SKUs, which are actually perfect matches for that particular product. Today, what they're returning is, here is the product that you should sell that customer based on your inventory position, their prior purchases, and some other promotional and seasonality effects associated with it. And here's the right price point to do it. So they've leapfrogged, because of AI, largely, they've leapfrogged that usability hurdle that was there previously, which was get a lot of orders like that are commodity type stuff where the inside salesperson had to decide which brand to represent in the transaction. Now the system's doing it pretty dang well.
Yeah, that's a great place to get started. Let's talk about science project type applications. Are there any applications within distribution where you're saying you've seen promises of where the technology could be working? Maybe it's limited by either the technology and or human comfort level on adopting it. Still could be classified as a science project. Are you seeing anything like that?
Yeah, it's really, really cool stuff. And it's funny because before, this has always been the case, I think. Love your perspective on this, Nick, but there's been technologies that have appeared sort of last in distribution. I grew up in Canton, Ohio, and I grew up in the 1970s, 1980s in Canton, Ohio.
Sure.
Where it still looked like the 1950s.
Yeah.
Like there were still kids going to school with like the real short haircuts, and it was still 1955 because we were the last to get everything.
Okay.
In many ways, distribution seems like it's historically been the last to get new tech.
Is this a theme throughout your life?
It's been a theme throughout my life. Maybe it's one of the reasons I love the industry. But it's There are some things like in construction that were coming of age maybe 5 to 7 years ago.
Sure.
In construction with contractors, general contractors, trade contractors are now finding their way to distribution, like automatic takeoff and measurement.
Exactly.
And so it was on the job site, it was on in the design phases, and now today you can quite literally take a blueprint and count the number of materials depending on what trade you're in for that, do estimating and do the bill of material creation directly from the print and do counts. Yeah. And that's a big task for a lot of construction focused distributors. It varies based on industry. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the trade contractors do it, sometimes the distributors do it. But that level of the ability to not just do counts and quote, but then move upstream in the design cycle.
Oh, yeah.
So I am seeing some distributors now where, hey, upload your design idea, customer or architect, or maybe even homeowner or end user, upload your design idea, and then the distributor is able to offer design guidance, design assistance, specification support, something that all distributors want to be able to do, regardless of what your business model is. The closer you can get to the customer, the more you can
true value-added services,
true demand creation
for
your, for the lines that you represent or for your products. Tech is enabling that at scale without it having to hire additional people in certain areas. And so I don't know if it's a science experiment because it's been in other industries, like contractors have used that for a while. We're starting to see it in our space. Yeah.
One of the areas that I see get overlooked at often is the identification of, okay, here are standard operating procedures by which we are engaging with our customers or by which we are operating to execute on the larger plan mission statement that we have there. Those get out of date, somewhat quickly as things change or areas like that. So even if you're a new operator coming into a business, spending the time understanding that to ensure that the things that can't break don't as you start to do work change is important.
Nick, I never thought of it until now. But you raise a really wonderful point, which is when I was hired way back in the mid 90s as a medical device engineer, I spent the first couple of weeks actually reading the process diagrams and reading the manufacturing work order and like the whole documentation around how we actually built what we built and reading the patents around what our IP was. It was part of my training. And that told me a lot, almost everything I needed to know about the business. Was the work instructions, the manufacturing instructions, the signage on the plant floor, and the patent library told me everything I need to know about the business. I've yet to go to, I won't say any distributors, many distributors where I can take a process, a set of defined process off of a shelf or off of a computer system, read it and understand how the business operates. There's a lot more nuance to it.
A lot. And I think part of that is just based off of the business model itself. We're not manufacturing pallets. We are buying in pallets and breaking down to eaches in order to serve the needs of the many. And so just by default, there's a lot of entropy that occurs.
Tons.
In those interactions.
And I'll add, and this was one that took me, because I'm pretty slow, it took me a good 5 years to learn this in my first 5 years in distribution, that the purchase order, the sales order, was almost always disconnected from why you received it. And so you'd stare at that. Well, we just got an order from a customer. Like, well, yeah, but we won that like 4.5 years ago when we did this and this and this. And as a result, that order just dropped in today.
Yeah.
And so this disconnection from the actual act of ordering, which doesn't happen in consumer lives. You order something because you made a moment of that time to purchase it. That disconnect between the actual value of the purchase order coming in and when that business was won, whether it was a supplier that you secured or a blanket contract that was secured or something else, that's really difficult to pick up. And so as a new sales leader, I'll cap it by saying this. I really don't envy having to do that. I can't imagine how complex that is to come in.
So Ben, we call the series Distribution at the Crossroads, where we live at the intersection between leadership, the business model of distribution, and then technology. As you look at kind of where we are headed as an industry over the next, it's difficult to say 3, 5, 10 years, but over the coming years, what are the decisions that you think organizations are going to need to continue to make in order for them to thrive in these changing times?
This is a tough time, an exciting time to be a distribution executive or a business owner, but also a little bit of a scary time. I'll be candid from where I sit, because I think we have more economic uncertainty, sort of foundational economic uncertainty than we've had in a fair period of time. Certainly, tariffs are a big portion of that, and they impact a lot of different distribution businesses. But there's just general economic uncertainty, and there are some areas of the economy that candidly weren't here a few years ago that are very meaningful portions of the economy. We're sitting here in Austin, Texas today. The data center environment here in Austin, Texas is a driver of economic activity. So there are some concentration risks at the moment. There's also economic risk and a tariff risk, as I mentioned. And there's also this inevitability, which I think folks are finally kind of coming around to, of the impact of technology on their business models. And so against that backdrop, you're staring down, I don't have clear runway on how my business would perform steady state for the next few years. And at the same time, things like order automation technology will be adopted by, if not me, my competitors. They'll have more efficient businesses. So how do I balance the technological investment, the human capital, the people portion of the business, which is the basis of competition and distribution, against a uncertain economic future, which is likely to remain opaque for a reasonable period of time. And so I think that the managerial challenge around distribution is probably higher than it's been in a long, long time. Maybe going back to the financial crisis when some businesses were down 50, 75% over the course of a couple of months. And then that environment might be a bit easier now that I think about it, because what else are you going to do except cut cost and try and survive? In this environment, there's an upside case, a strong upside case for innovating faster, modifying the business model to where the supplier and the customer needs are, and outpacing your competitors. And there's an existential risk if you don't, because of the tough economic environment that we're in, plus the likelihood that competitors will evolve and either be lower cost or potentially differentiated in the business. And so it's a tough environment. So I think all that is to say, the first sort of major decision is, what do I do with my tech stack to transform it from one that allows the business to run to one that runs the business? Meaning it provides an opportunity for evolution of the business model with whatever direction I want and need to take it. And so what's the right level of technological investment? I don't mean just CapEx and OpEx, but organizationally.
Yeah.
What are the kind of skills that I need to have in the business in the next 12 months to have more confidence that I can weather this economic storm and this competitive disruption storm? I think that's a big one. And the second one is kind of comes hand in hand for that, which is a lot of the distributors that I got to know over the years had zero debt. Not true in the public markets, certainly not in private equity where they're levered up, especially with an LBO acquisition. But a lot of family-owned distribution businesses, the only debt they have is AP. That's literally it. There's no bank lines in many cases. Thinking about when is appropriate to leverage the business to invest in those capabilities in advance. And I think I'm not advocating for it, by the way, but I'm saying it's a tough decision that I think a lot of owners maybe wouldn't have had to contemplate in years prior. But now I need to invest in people. I need to invest in technology. I may need to look for ways to be able to do that. Is it a debt instrument? Do I put additional equity into the business? How do I go about doing that? And I think those are real decisions that are going to be crossroads kind of decisions over the next few years.
Yeah. Well, it's times like this where there is uncertainty. There's also opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the areas that we touched on, from culture to how we think about technology, that idea of data abstraction. I mean, I hope everyone who's listening to that is going back to their technology team and saying, hey, if we want to move more in a composable way where we're looking at being agile with technology in the face of uncertainty, how quickly, if we wanted to spin this a new order entry tool up or a new sales automation tool, would we be able to do that with our data? Those areas like that, I think, are what makes this an exciting time to be within this industry.
Without a doubt.
Wonderful. Ben, thank you very much for being on the podcast. If people want to reach you and they want to talk more, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Just hit me on LinkedIn. Just look up Ben Albu. You can hit me direct on LinkedIn. It's the easiest way.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you.